Bishop, thank you very much for taking the time again. Always a pleasure to sit down and talk to you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to have a good discussion as we always have in the past.
It seems like it was just yesterday, but 9 months ago, Pope Francis came to America. As you know, we traveled with 400 Rhode Islanders. People were really excited, whether if you were Catholic or not, they were excited that he was coming to America. 9 months has gone by. Do you think that excitement is still there?
Well, I think there is a lot of excitement, and I think the people who were part of the Holy Father's visit to the United States, especially those who were present in person, I think that excitement is something that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. So, yeah, I'm sure there's some excitement and some wonderful memories, and hopefully a renewal in faith and a recommitment to Christ and the Church. Ultimately, and the Holy Father himself would say this, his visit's not about himself. It's about the Church, it's about our faith, it's about Christ. So I hope that those who were part of that historic pilgrimage are still strong in faith and still excited about being a Catholic.
I was amazed at how many young people were, not just on our trip, that were in Philadelphia. There were almost 1 million people there, and 60, 70% were younger. I was kind of surprised at that.
Yeah, and I think the Holy Father, as did Pope Benedict and also Pope John Paul, St. John Paul, they have appealed to young people in a very particular way. I think because the popes, including Pope Francis, are challenging people to do their best, to be their best. And I think young people like to hear that kind of a challenge, and I think they need to be challenged. It's something different than they're getting from the worldly culture, the secular society these days. And I think the fact that it's different, it's appealing to some very positive qualities in their life. I think young people are responding to that.
How does he challenge you as a bishop?
Well, I think he challenges me and all the bishops to keep our eyes open, to be alert to the world around us, not to become secluded or isolated in any way, but to be aware of the needs of the world, the needs of people around us, the vision of the broader church, but also the needs of people right here at home. And the Holy Father certainly has spoken with a very, very clear and distinct and challenging voice about relating to real people and being involved in the issues and needs that they have. He's certainly been very insistent on the church being a church of the poor and accompanying people in their own journey of faith and responding to all the needs they have.
Seems like every couple of weeks he comes out with something that's kind of a challenge.
Every couple of weeks or every couple of days, perhaps. It seems to be a pretty regular feature of this Pope, but that's terrific.
So Father Connors was on the trip with us, and we were on the bus, and we were chatting, and he told me that he went to Canada to see Pope John Paul II. I think it was World Family Meetings, I'm not sure why. And he said that was what triggered him to go back to the seminary and become a priest. Do you see a lot of that happening with this Pope?
Well, I hope so. It's always hard to relate specific numbers of anything to a particular historic event like this, because sometimes seeds are planted and it takes many, many years for them to bear good fruit. But we certainly hope and pray that the Holy Father's visit will inspire more young men to consider vocation to the priesthood. That's the great pastoral need of our church. I hope the Holy Father's visit will encourage more people to go to Mass on Sundays and to live lives of mercy. You know, this is the year of mercy, the Jubilee of mercy. So I hope the Holy Father's visit and his words and his example challenge a lot of people to do better, including young men to think about the priesthood, but all Catholics, average Catholics, to think about their faith, the importance of their faith, what it means to be a Catholic, what it means to go to Mass every Sunday and not just at Christmas time and Easter time. So it's very important that we find ourselves responding to Pope Francis that makes a difference in our lives. He can't just be a rock star that we like to look at from a distance. He's challenging us to be involved and to make a difference.
I know vocations is something that's been on your plate for a long time. 3 years ago when we sat down, you had mentioned that you had lost 25 priests to active ministry in the last couple of years. And I noticed you just published something a couple of weeks ago. That number went from 25 to 54. It's a lot.
Right. In this decade, since the beginning of this decade, in the last 7 years, including this year, we've lost 54 priests from active ministry in this diocese, and that's huge. Now, of that 54, 45 of them are retired because of age and health and so forth. In that same period, we've only had 15 priests ordained. So that's a net loss of 39 priests serving the Catholic Church in Rhode Island. That's unprecedented. It's historic. It's huge for us. And it's presenting some real pastoral challenges.
So next year, it gets even worse for you. I know you know the numbers. July of 2017, you have 18 men that are 70 and over, retirement age. What would happen if they all decided to turn in their retirement papers?
Well, if they all decided to retire at once, our serious problem would become even more difficult. Now, fortunately, thank God, all of our priests don't retire when they turn 70. And retirement depends so much on so many personal factors, their own health and their energy and their experience and so forth. So we're very grateful for those priests who do stay on beyond the typical age of 70. And we have a number of priests. So I don't expect and hope that all of those will retire next year. But no doubt, that particular number aside, this challenge of having a diminishing number of priests, it's going to continue for the immediate future only because of our demographics. We have so many priests in their 70s and mid and late 60s. They will be retiring at some point. And we know that the numbers of those slated to be ordained are much smaller than that.
Is it a priest shortage or a church surplus?
Both. That's a good way of putting it, I suppose. Yeah, we have fewer and fewer priests. And we have probably more churches and parishes than we need. We're dealing with that issue as well. But it's a combination of things. It's a combination of the availability of priests, the numbers of people who are changing and perhaps shifting locales and the changing demographics. Sometimes it's a financial issue as well. Sometimes we have priests and people but no money. So those three factors can affect the pastoral life of the church. The availability of clergy, the number of people involved in the church, and the financial resources.
So if they can't pay their bills, let's say they're just bringing in $2,000 a week, doesn't even pay for heat, electricity. When does it come to a point where enough is enough, we can't keep the building open?
Well, it depends on so many circumstances, and it's hard to have a very distinct and specific answer to that because it does involve a lot of circumstances. In some cases, for example, parishes are not bringing in a lot of money right now, but they might have large endowments. In other cases, they're doing very well, but also have significant temporal needs. Perhaps they need a new roof on the church or new boilers or whatever unexpected emergencies that come up. So it's hard to have a specific answer to that, but it's something we monitor very closely. At a certain point, some parishes just don't have the financial resources available to keep going. And often that's related to the number of people who are present, the number of people who are attending Mass, and their ability to support the church.
3 years ago, you said that hospital chaplains, campus ministry probably would be affected. 3 years later, I think we're seeing that, right?
We're seeing it across the board. Again, in our parishes, some places that have had 3 priests only have 2. Some parishes that have had 2 priests only have 1, and in more and more cases, parishes are sharing the ministry of a priest. That's happening a lot. But yeah, it's had an effect on some of our campus ministries and availability of hospital chaplains. We're doing our best to use our clergy personnel, our priest personnel as well as we can, but increasingly it's going to be a challenge for us. And I think people will notice the difference.
So what is the plan?
Well, the plan is to continue responding as well as we can, to try to provide for the basic pastoral and spiritual needs of our people. But they cannot, our people cannot expect that everything is going to remain exactly the same as they've known it for the last 10 or 20 or 50 years. They will have fewer priests available. Some parishes will be sharing a priest. In some cases, a parish might have to close. People might go to Mass on Sunday and find that the Mass schedule has changed because one priest can't do the same that the 2 priests have done. So they will be noticing changes, but hopefully we can respond in a very tactical, in a very patient and prayerful way. I don't believe in imposing a diocesan-wide solution to this in one fell swoop. We're trying to do it in a very gradual and, I might say, inductive way, one place at a time. But everybody's going to be affected. These churches did not grow up overnight. It took 100 years or more for the diocese to become what it has been. So the churches won't close overnight either. I think we need to do this very patiently and hopefully in a way that we can still provide the basic spiritual needs of people.
I know Mount Carmel is closed. What do you intend to do with that property?
Well, the church building itself is closed. On paper, there's still a parish community there. So canonically, there's still a parish there. But we're in the process right now looking at that. At some point, we'll have to bring that to a closure, to a conclusion. What happens to the property after that, thus far, I have no idea. We have to go through the canonical process first, and then we'll see what's available as far as using the property. That's still to be determined.
Any others in that situation?
Nothing in that situation right now, because again, that church building was closed last fall in November, I believe. So we don't have any situations like that exactly, but there will be and going forward.
You've done 2 classes, business class, or looking people to go into your business department, I'm probably not saying it right, and 2, a new class of deacons. This was strategic on your part to do this?
Right, well, as you know, we've had the services of a great number of permanent deacons for a long time in this diocese. And 4 or 5 years ago, we ordained a new class of deacons, and we thought it was time to start that process again. That doesn't happen overnight, the ordination of deacons. We're just beginning now to recruit some new parties who are interested in the diaconate, but that's a 4 to 5 year process before they'll actually be ordained. But we're beginning because the deacons have provided great service for the church and the community, and we will need them increasingly going forward. So we've started that process. And we also began this class, as you say, of training some people to be parish business managers or business administrators who can provide a lot of assistance to our pastors, or in some cases perhaps even take over the administration of a parish. So again, that's a slow process, but we need some people available to step into the breach, to fill the need when the time comes.
You know, somebody's going to be watching this and they're going to say, I have the answer for you, Bishop. Why don't you just have married priests?
Well, that's something else they probably have to discuss with Pope Francis, and maybe we'll have a surprise along that line too. Now, as you know, there are some married priests in the church, but in the Western church for over 1,000 years, it's been a very strong discipline and a spiritual discipline for us. So I don't see any immediate change in that, and it's certainly nothing I could do unilaterally or locally. That would have to be determined by the universal church. In theory, is it possible? Of course, because we already have some married priests. Do I see it coming in the immediate future in a way that will be helpful to us? No.
So that's not going to fix the problem?
Well, I suppose it would provide more clergy for us if that were to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future.
Pope is starting, I think this happened 13 years ago too, the possibility of women deacons. They looked at it maybe 13 years ago. He's brought it up again, and that's brought up another firestorm of controversy.
Yes, and that was a comment the Pope made, I guess last week or some time ago, about the possibility of studying again the role of deacons in the history of the church and whether or not women perhaps could be admitted to the diaconate. There was a Vatican Commission that studied that 13 or 14 years ago, and they acknowledged that from historical reasons that it just hasn't happened in the history of the church the way we understand deacons now. There was a time in the history of the church with a group of women who were assisting that were referred to as deacons or deaconesses, but their role was very different than we understand it today. They were never ordained, they were never admitted to holy orders. And that's the challenge. Deacons, as we understand them today, are part of the sacrament of holy orders. Holy orders includes deacons and priests and bishops. We've never had women deacons admitted to holy orders, and it's unlikely it'll happen again. But the Pope did say, okay, let's look at it again. Let's be sure to understand the diaconate and its theological and historical richness, and let's see where that leads us.
What's your position on it?
Well, again, I'm not a great theologian or historian. I think I understand the history of it. I just don't think it's feasible right now as we understand holy orders. There are many ways, and the Pope made this point as well, many ways that women can and should be involved in the life of the church. And heaven knows the church would not be the same today if we didn't have the services and the leadership of women in very key positions. We need women to be increasingly involved in the church. That does not mean they have to be admitted to holy orders. As the Pope said, perhaps one of the worst things we could do would be to clericalize women. They don't have to be clerics. They don't have to be ordained to participate in the life of the church. And in some ways that would even limit their participation even more.
Something you've been vocal about is divorced and remarried and that whole process, that it's cumbersome. It was about a year ago, 2 years ago, that you started talking about that. Even the Pope mentioned that too. Where are we now at this point for couples looking for that?
Well, again, that was part of the conversation that came up with the two synods on the family that Pope Francis had convened in October of 2015 and 2014, talking about the situation of the family in the world today, marriage and family. And after those two synods of bishops, the Holy Father wrote his apostolic letter, Amoris Laetitia, which was published just about a month ago or so, in which he talks about the pastoral care of the family, the richness of family life, the contributions that families can make, and the challenges that they face. In that very broad context, and in that very long document, the Holy Father talks about the need to accompany Catholics in different situations, including those who are divorced and remarried. Now, what the Holy Father said in the document, like many things the Pope says, is somewhat enigmatic. People are still debating exactly what he said and what he meant and what the implications are. So we have to figure that out, I think. However, what he's saying clearly and without any ambiguity is that the Church has to be more sensitive to Catholics in their real life situations and where they find themselves right now. We just can't write people off. We can't just throw them in a category. The Church, bishops, priests, those who are pastoral ministers, we have to find out where the people are, walk with them, help them, support them, and keep them involved in the life of the Church as much as possible.
Have you seen an uptick in people looking or applying for annulments?
No, not since then. In fact, in recent years, the number of people applying for annulments has decreased. Now, the Holy Father has asked us to try to simplify the annulment process, and we, like all the dioceses in the world, I suppose, are in the process of doing that. But we have not seen, as far as I know, an increase of annulment requests.
You agree with that, to simplify the process, right?
Oh, sure. And I think that would be a good thing. Even the changes in the annulment process the Holy Father made about a year ago or so, it's still a fairly complex process, and I don't want people to get the idea they can just walk into a church or into our chancery and sign a piece of paper and get their marriage declared null and void. We believe still, as we always have, from the words of Christ, that marriage is meant to be a permanent, faithful, lifelong, exclusive union of one man and one woman. That hasn't changed. When people make that commitment, when they exchange their vows before the Church and before God, that's a commitment that they have to take very, very seriously in the sight of God. And if something happens that the marriage ends and there's a divorce, then that doesn't automatically excuse them from the commitments they've made, but it's something they have to be very, very conscious about.
We're talking about the challenges. This has been a big challenge for you. It seems like everybody talks about this. Unfunded pension liabilities. That's something that's a concern for you too, isn't it?
Yes, although we're doing much better than we were 7 or 8 years ago, both in terms of our lay pension fund for the lay employees of the Church across the diocese, and also for our priests. The priests have a separate retirement fund, pension fund. Both those funds are doing much better now than they were 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, but they're not fully funded, and we still have some work to do, especially with the priest retirement fund. That's less funded than the lay pension fund is. So we have to be cautious of that and do our best to support that.
You've seen local mayors in Providence, they're doing that, going to the nonprofits now, asking for money, taxing them. Providence, the colleges have seen it, Providence College, the hospitals. Have they approached the diocese at all yet?
No, as far as I know, they certainly haven't approached me, and as far as I know, they haven't approached anybody on the staff about changing our nonprofit status.
What would happen if they did that?
Well, first of all, I think we would resist that because the contributions we make to our community, to society, are enormous. And if we had to start paying taxes, as for-profits do, that would harm our ability to provide these services for education, our Catholic schools, homeless shelters, soup kitchens, food pantries, heating assistance. All of the ministries we have, all the programs we have would be affected in a very detrimental way if we had to start paying taxes. And important for people to remember, this wouldn't, if they were to change the law, that wouldn't affect just the Catholic Church. It would also affect all of our houses of worship, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, whatever. And some of those churches, I suspect, are less able to provide taxes than we would be even. So it would affect other churches perhaps even more than the Catholic Church, perhaps even threatening their existence. So I hope we don't have to pay taxes. I don't see any movement that way. It would be really harmful to the church, and it would be harmful in the long run to the whole community, because our churches could not do the good things we're doing now. And then nobody would benefit from that.
You're talking about homeless shelters and food pantries. Obviously, Catholic Charities put a lot of that money towards there. I noticed, though, that you get a legislative grant, too, and I thought it was kind of curious. You get the legislative grant, but then you turn around and you give it out. Why don't they just distribute it to the agencies that need it? Why do they send it to you?
Well, I suppose why they do it is something you'd have to ask those who give the grants. It's not unusual for the government to, in a sense, subcontract services to nonprofits, community groups, because frankly we do it sometimes with less administrative costs, with less bureaucracy, and sometimes we're closer to the people that who are being served. But you're right, what you described is that we get money from the government, from state grants, for example. We don't sit on that. We don't keep it. We use it to provide services. So I think that's legitimate, and I think sometimes nonprofits can do things and provide services far more effectively than a larger government can do.
I think that's the controversy going on in the state right now. Why don't they just do a line item in the budget and just send them the money?
Sure. Well, I guess that would be one approach, but I have no problem with the concept of legislative grants, whatever category they fall into. It's taxpayer money going back to help taxpayers. I don't see the problem with that. Now, I think it's really important that those grants and that process be very transparent, that it be accountable, that it's fully audited, and I think it's wrong if grants are used to provide political favor or political leverage. I think that's where the problem comes in. If it's used in some way to gain political access or garner political support, that's the problem, I think, and if the money's not used properly. The concept of grants, everybody gives grants. Federal government gives grants, states give grants, cities give grants, foundations give grants. That's the way community works, the way society works. So as long as it's done properly, I don't think that's problematic.
Catholic Charities, it's wrapping up. What's your goal for this year?
The goal for this year is $8 million, as it's been for the last several years. We haven't quite hit the goal yet. In recent years, we've gotten very, very close, and I think we're going to be very close again this year. We have a few weeks to go for collecting and accounting. I think we're going to be very close to our goal. Whether or not we hit it, if anybody's viewing today would like to make a contribution to Catholic Charities, perhaps it could make the difference for us. And Catholic Charity Appeal is really important because it helps us carry on the work of the church. It benefits so many people in our society. So we're still collecting funds.
All right, one more hot topic, controversial topic that you've been involved in, marijuana, pot. I thought that was interesting that you spoke out about that and the recreational use of it. Right. What made you decide to speak out on that?
Well, I think it's what the church does. The church brings...
You're not afraid to speak out on anything, right?
No, well, I suppose there are limits. There are many things I have not spoken out about in the state. But some of these issues have some moral connotations and moral consequences. And I certainly felt that the discussion about marijuana, which was emerging in our state and it's become a very vibrant conversation, I thought it would be appropriate to say something about that. The church doesn't address the use of marijuana specifically, but the church, in our catechism, it talks about drug use and abuse. Pope Francis has spoken out very strongly, very clearly about drug use and abuse, and I thought it'd be appropriate to make some comments about it. Because that's what the church does. We bring the gospel, we bring the teachings of Christ, we bring the tradition of the church to bear on these contemporary issues. I think I've made it clear I'm certainly not opposed to the medical use of marijuana, and I'm certainly not opposed to the decriminalization of marijuana. But whether or not it should be legalized is another whole question that I find very problematic.
The whole an argument is, what's the difference between alcoholic drinks and marijuana.
Right, and I mentioned that in my article too. I mean, it can be argued that the individual use of marijuana by a responsible adult in a controlled circumstance is not always sinful, might not be morally inappropriate. But with marijuana use, as with alcohol or gambling and other activities, we have to consider the circumstances. And the recreational use of marijuana has been studied, and there are serious questions, at least, about the consequences in terms of impaired driving, in terms of the health concerns related to it, in terms of whether or not it's a gateway drug to other drugs. I'm not an expert in any of those things, but I know there are enough questions out there to say we need to look at this really carefully, and we can't rush to approve, to open up wide the doors to legalize marijuana use. I just think it has more downsides than positive values.
All right, let's wrap up by just doing some quick questions for you. Your biggest fear as bishop?
Biggest fear as bishop is that in some way, for some reasons, I can't provide for the basic spiritual and pastoral care of the people of this diocese have been entrusted to my care. And that has many different facets to it, but my job is to lead the church and to provide basic spiritual and pastoral care in a very changing world, in a very changing society. I guess that's my biggest fear because it's my biggest responsibility.
Your greatest joy?
Greatest joy is seeing the church work so well. We have challenges, we have problems, but every day as I travel around the diocese, and I've been doing that a lot on our confirmation schedule and for school visits and other activities, every day I see people doing great things in the name of Christ and the church. We're educating people, we're serving people, we're promoting moral values, we're making a positive difference in our community. I have seen how good the church can be and how many wonderful things it does. You know, we just had our Lumen Gentium Award dinner, which has become an annual event for us this week. Wonderful to see 800 people there from clear across the state doing great things for the church every day. In our society, our culture would be very different if the church weren't there.
Do you think the universal church should do a better job publicizing the good stuff that they do?
Sure. I think the universal church and the church in our country and the church in the United States and locally, we can always do a better job communicating without boasting ourselves or blowing our own trumpets. People should know and understand what the church does every day, that sometimes we forget. And it's the job of bishops and priests to provide the leadership, but the good work is really taking place with people in our pews every single day. And that's a wonderful thing I see every single day.
One of our reporters knew I was coming to talk to you. He said, you have to ask this question. Quote, would you rather uphold the church's values or watch it suffocate itself?
Well, I guess the answer is that it doesn't have to be either or. I think the church doesn't suffocate. I think the church prospers when we uphold our moral values and our teachings. Someone has to be, as Jesus said, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And St. Paul said, be careful you don't conform yourselves to the current generation. You have to be like shining stars in the sky. So when the church upholds its teachings and its values, that's when we do our best. That's when we prosper and thrive. If we start to give that away, we will have nothing to offer and nothing to attract people to us.
If you didn't select this vocation, become a priest, what would you have done?
I don't know.
Think about that?
I've been a
Some
priest.
days.
I've been a priest for so long, I don't remember what I would have done. I don't know. I enjoy teaching. I may have been a teacher in a college somewhere. I enjoy writing. Maybe I would have been a journalist for some newspaper or TV station somewhere. I don't know. I think something along the realm of teaching or journalism, whatever. There was a time when I thought it'd be wonderful to be a professional golfer, but that was off the table very quickly as soon as I started playing golf. But I still think it's a great way to make a living.
I was there when you were introduced as bishop back, was it May 31st you were installed, right? 2005. The press conference a couple of weeks before that. You kind of brought new energy, or you tried to, one of the things that you had mentioned, you wanted to energize the diocese. Now it's been 11 years. Have you accomplished that?
I don't know. I think that's something people on the outside have to judge, what my impact has been or what my effect has been someone recently just called me a moral failure for Rhode Island. That's okay. I'm sure we've accomplished some good things, perhaps some things we haven't done very well, but I'm doing my best. That's all I can say. I'm working very hard every day. I'm doing my best. I'm one guy, but I have lots of other help, and ultimately it's all in God's hands. I'm doing my little part right now. I will do my best as long as I can, and God has to do everything else. And that's how I can sleep at night. That's how I have some sense of peace and prayerfulness. I'm not ultimately in charge of this whole thing. I'm doing my best. I'm working hard, but ultimately it's all in God's hands. So He's responsible in the end.
You have 7 years to retirement.
I've been counting.
Yeah, you've been counting the days. What do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done?
Oh gosh, I don't know. President Obama's working on his legacy now, but he's retiring in a few months. I have 7 years yet to work on it. I don't know. I'll have to think about that as time goes on. I hope people can say that I've worked hard and done my best, and that we've done our best to strengthen the church and to improve the community, to make some contributions to the world, to help people in our time, in our space, with all the limitations and challenges we have. The church was working a long time before I got here, and it will continue to work a long time after I'm gone. Ultimately, it's in God's hands. My legacy will be described by God.
Bishop, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.